everybody, to another installment of MuniMod 2021. My name is Chris Hawley, and I'm the Manager of Research and Innovation for the Florida League of Cities. We thank you for making time to view our content, and we've got an incredible guest with us today. We'll go around the room and do some introductions, but Matt Broffman himself, being from the city of Orlando, I have to brag on him. The work that they've done there has been featured in Bloomberg Cities Network, how better digital services can build trust in local government, and also GovTech Magazine, Orlando improves citizen satisfaction with existing tools. So he's going to talk about the work that they've done there, and then following that, we'll have a conversation. So with that, gentlemen, Wade.
I'm Wade Berkeley. I'm a research analyst here with the Florida League of Cities on the Center for Municipal Research. That's my first MuniMod. I'm happy to be here.
Great. I'm John Daly with JDA Strategies. Matt, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. By the way, congratulations on recently being named best 40 under 40 in Orlando. That's incredible. I'm familiar with the incredible work that you do through the years of MuniMod, and the work that you're doing in Orlando is second to none. You're the best in the business, man, and we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for that, Matt. Give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, Matt Broffman, I serve as the Director of Innovation for Mayor Buddy Dyer at the City of Orlando. I've been with the city now 6 years. I came from the private sector where I led product development across a variety of different industries from a digital perspective. And really honestly took the job, I know we'll talk probably a little bit more about this, but took the job on a whim, not really knowing what I was getting myself into, and has really been able to bring a lot of the private sector techniques to the public sector, and hopefully make our resident experiences a little bit better.
Yeah. Thank you.
And so I think I'll jump in and just kind of share a little bit about some of the work that we're doing, specifically around what we consider our customer experience work, right? And so that's really about building trust in government. And so, nationally, trust in government is really at an all-time low and continues to decline for the most part. That's what we see on the left. And then on the right is trust in local government, which maintains pretty steady. And there's a really good reason for that. And that's because people interact with their local government. But that doesn't mean we should take it for granted. And so one of the things that Mayor Dyer was really insistent upon is that we look at and think about how do we make sure that we maintain and increase that trust. And so what we know is the easiest way to increase trust in government is actually by satisfying your customers. You can see that on the 9X. And people who are satisfied with their government and the service they got are 9 times more likely somebody who is not, right? And so that is the easiest way to do it, and that was the way that we wanted to focus on. The challenge is, right, anybody who's interacting with government is, at least perception-wise, familiar with this. This is not a picture from the city of Orlando. I don't like to share which city it's from, but this is what people expect, right? This idea that they're going to show up, there's going to be a long line, they're probably going to be closed, they'll be on lunch, they close early on Friday during the day, they're not even open on Friday. This idea of the red tape you're going to get into at City Hall. And then if you go to the website, we like to think of our websites, city websites for these junk drawers, right? This idea that there's a lot of great things in the city website, but good luck finding them. And so what we want to do is to really think about how do we reorganize it. And then if you did find what you were looking for, oftentimes you're greeted with an old, outdated form, usually a PDF form, maybe a fillable PDF form. But anybody who's looked at PDFs on the phone is like zooming in and out, trying to fill it out. And then if you have to sign it and figure out where to send it back to and go back to the other tab, you've got to open in Chrome to find the email. It's a big hassle, right? And so what we usually do is when we're like, I'll get to that later. And depending on what it is, you may actually never end up getting to it. And so we like to think about service design. And so service design, I like to tell this story about a friend of mine who was sick and tired of turning on grandma's TV. And this is what she did, right? She taped up all the things that grandma didn't need to know about, wrote very clear instructions on what to do on off. PBS is on channel 522, and then even fixed, if you will, the last button, because last didn't make sense to grandma, but undo does, right? Like this idea that like last what? Like, oh, undo what I just did? Okay, great, that made sense, right? And how did she get there? Was she sat and watched her grandma try and use it and was able to help her figure out how do you redesign this remote to work for the one thing grandma wants to do. Well, at the end of the day, we like to think about that with our residents. Right? If a resident comes to our website and wants to fill a pothole, they don't care about anything else that's happening in the city of Orlando. They want that pothole filled. So talking about how many potholes we fill every year on the page about potholes, not helpful for the person who's trying to request a pothole filled, right? And what we want to do is we want to think about the city as this big universal remote. We're covering up all of the things that they don't care about and giving them very clear instructions and even changing our terms, right? So it turns out a pothole is a very specific thing. And in theory, you have to be seeing dirt through the asphalt for it to be classified as a pothole. Otherwise, it's a divot in the road or some other term. I don't remember them all. But the point is, the customer thinks it's a pothole, let them call it a pothole. We can decide whether it's actually a pothole or not and address it properly, right? So we're going to use the terms that people are familiar with. And so to do that, we launched what we call a Digital Service Academy at the City of Orlando. It's a 3-day workshop. The first day, we bring our staff together, and they actually, from different departments, have to secret shop somebody else's service. So you're seeing here, somebody in parks reporting a pothole, somebody in our streets team who's requesting a new trash bin, somebody from our solid waste team who's trying to get a special event permit, right? And so they have to go and do that while the other staff person who's actually responsible for that service has to sit and watch. And so they see them go to Google, because that's where most people start, type in, report a pothole or tell the city about a pothole and see what happens, right? And they get to see the experience from the customer's perspective and honestly end up laughing about it, but laughing about oftentimes how confusing and difficult it was, right? Because we put all of this information on the city website when, again, all they really wanted to do was figure it out. If they thought they needed to call someone, they would call, they'd get voicemails, they'd leave a voicemail, right? And you'd get to experience and see this, and they got to map that process out. And then they'd go back and share that with their departments, really to help them understand, really, this is the experience that our customers are having. And so we shouldn't be surprised that when someone gets on the phone with us, they're already a little frustrated. And then on day 2, we take them through and we actually we'll talk through how do we redesign that page? How do we make one page for everything? And so here's a good example of contesting a parking ticket. Where on the left-hand side was our original content. You can see all the bolds that we have kind of littered throughout, but the idea was we really wanted you to call or email the office with any questions regarding your citation prior, all caps and bold, to submitting the appeal paperwork. And the reason for that, which, if you ask residents, which we did, why do you think the city of Orlando wants you to call before appealing? Most residents think the city wants you to call so that the city can talk you out of appealing. Well, it turned out our staff actually wanted to talk to you because the appeal process means going to court. And if there was a mistake, we don't need to go to court. Just tell us about it and we'll fix it. But that wasn't the message that was being received by our customers, right? They thought, no, I'm not calling the city because they're just going to try and tell me why I have no case, but I know I have a case. And so people were filing this appeal paperwork. So instead, we've redesigned the content, and the staff came up with this, which is first step is view photos of your citation. As it turns out, we take pictures of every parking citation. You can go online and look at it. Second step would be find out if staff can review your citation, right? A way friendlier way of saying the exact same thing of please call our offices. And instead of calling, we just ask them a bunch of questions. And so we actually ended up taking what normally would have been this court proceeding that required a notary and a fee if you lose, to a bunch of questions of tell us when the ticket was issued, why don't you think you deserve it, did you actually not pay, which, by the way, surprisingly, a lot of people think they don't deserve a ticket and will actually tell us they didn't pay. We're going to tell them they have no case for appeal there, and they're welcome to go to court if they want to. But most of the time, if you had a handicap tag and it fell down, that you can send us a picture of that handicap tag, they'll usually reduce the fee or waive the fine or whatever it might be. And so staff is now able to work with people instead of people having to go and show up in court, wasting our time, wasting the residents' time, and wasting, obviously, the court's time as well. And the third day is really focused on testing with users. So we take those services back out to our residents at city parks, city facilities, and test it with them, right? We ask them to pretend we're engaging that service. You can go ahead and try and do it, and they rate it. And to make sure that the residents are actually able to use the services we design. We're able to uncover lots of things. Again, the language differences of when we use a term that's a government term that they're not familiar with. And what's interesting here is on the top left is actually we were going to launch a brand new digital business permitting process. And those are customers, and that's Nicole, who's actually on the phone because she couldn't actually get into her account and she was having all sorts of issues. Well, it turned out of the 5 people we're testing with, 3 of them thought that they had successfully renewed their business tax. None of them actually did. And so that's not to say it was impossible and you couldn't do it. Let's say if we launched this thing, we'd have a lot of people frustrated thinking that they paid their tax and they hadn't, and then fines being levied on them later on, and a major problem. And so we decided that year not to launch that tool until we could resolve those issues. So it's a really great way for us to check in, and really the impact is shown here through some of these social media posts, which I love, which are really focused on the pothole story. And what's fascinating here is these are a lot of people telling you how quickly we fixed their pothole, right? Which is awesome that, people will turn to social media and give us credit for how quickly we fix potholes. But what's more fascinating is these only started after we redesigned the service. We never changed how fast we fill potholes. All we changed was how easy it was to report it. But in their idea, it made the whole process faster, right? And so it's kind of that idea of Amazon, right? Like, yes, let's all be very clear. Amazon is quick. It feels like you push the button and they're here, within a couple hours sometimes. But it's also about how easy it is to buy that roll of toilet paper that makes it feel like it arrives instantaneously, right? If you had to go through 25 screens to pick out the toilet paper and buy the toilet paper, it would not feel as quick, even if the delivery time was the same, right? It's that totality of the process that we know impacts their experience. But we don't rely just on social media for our feedback. One of the more innovative things that we've done is we've launched this customer experience management program. And what we do is after every service, we've got about 35 services of the 300 plus services, where we send out a feedback mechanism via email that the first question is, how much do you trust us, right? So after engaging with this service, how much do you trust us? Then we ask about satisfaction, speed of delivery, a bunch of different key drivers. And the idea here is to really understand how we're performing on our services. I'm really happy that overall, when we launched it today, we have a really high trust rate with folks in the city of Orlando. You saw the average for the national is somewhere around 72, 73, high 60s, depends on the year for local government. We're really proud of our trust. We're also really proud of our satisfaction, which continues to rise. Excuse me. But what we noticed was that there were some services that were lacking. And so a good example of that was our Reserve a Park service, which only 48% of our residents were satisfied. And if you think about for a moment what reserving a park is, it should be a pretty good experience, right? It's for someone's birthday, it's for an event, it's incredibly inexpensive for the most part to reserve a park. Why is it that all these people are not satisfied when reserving a park? And so when we dive in on the data, we can see here how far they are on the right-hand side is how satisfied they are for that. So how timely they think it is, how useful it is, how the ease of use and friendliness, and how high up it is how much it correlates to satisfaction. And so what you can see here is that 100% of the respondents basically are saying we're friendly and the staff is friendly, but somewhere only around 43% are saying we're timely. And so we started digging in and asking the parks team what's going on. And it turned out when you went to reserve a park online, they'd received that request and they were calling you back. I don't know about you, but when my phone rings with an unknown number, I let it go to voicemail. Then you get the voicemail, you're calling them back, they may not be at your desk, and you're playing phone tag. And oh, by the way, all they wanted to do was just confirm that that was the date and time of the park you wanted, and now they'll send you the invoice via email. And so as a customer, it was friendly, but an absolute waste of 2 to 3 and maybe even more days of phone tag to figure this out, right? And so we had them switch the process up and said, why don't you just send them the invoice with a note that says, if this information is incorrect, give us a call or reply to the email and let us know. And so they made that change and they saw a 75% increase in satisfaction. And so by analyzing this data and understanding what our residents think, we're able to increase the overall satisfaction and therefore trust in government. And so we've seen since we've started, our trust trends continue to rise year over year. And we're really, really happy about that. And the other thing that we're doing is every time somebody gives us feedback, we ask them if they want to participate in future research. We've got about over 3,000 residents that have said yes. And so then we reach back out to them when we have questions about other policy initiatives we're doing. So sustainability, smart cities, even during COVID, we reached out to our residents to ask how they were doing and what services they needed from the city. And so it's been a great way for us to really engage our community. Our goal is to continue to build that up and have it be more representative of our entire community, and to really use that as a way to understand and get the pulse of what our community is thinking. And we're continuing to expand with services. We actually just added police. So we're working on this idea that in an ideal world, if you got pulled over by a police officer, you would receive a survey either via text or via email, or at least a business card from the officer that would tell you where you can go tell us how we're doing, right? Because we want to build that trust in law enforcement along with the city. And then we're also closing the loop. So anytime a resident has an issue or a bad experience, so they're following up individually with those residents. And again, the goal there is to increase satisfaction and trust. So I know a lot there, but that's a little overview or a snapshot of that program.
Yeah, and so I wanted to, one of the quotes in here that I know John mentioned, you being selected by the Orlando Business Journal for the 40 under 40, is it says, Matt, and I know this is your team, This is not, Matt Broffman projects. It takes, a whole team to get a lot of this off the ground. But it says that your focus on making sure that Orlando as a city is leading when it comes to innovative ideas, and also a city where those ideas are implemented. His data-driven approach to resident satisfaction and his focus on leveraging technology to enhance residents' lives has transformed the way the city conducts business. What I want to highlight is this second part, which I think is really important, especially for some of our MuniMod participants. And it says, Matt does this because as a native resident of Orlando, he and his family have decided that Orlando is the place they want to call home. And he works each day to make it a better place for all who call that city home. So, when we challenge students to come up with ideas to make local government more efficient, it's because this is where we live, right? So there's a passion about your community. What types of, maybe some advice or ways, what sparked your interest in making your community a better place? I know you said you came from the private sector, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I think we all hopefully walk around our world, right, and think of ways that it could be better. And if you don't, there's probably something wrong with you. But we imagine that, right? Like there are just things that could be better, whether that's government or the line waiting for your favorite pizza joint, right? Like we all get frustrated with things, and so where are you going to have impact? And so to me, this is being in a city is a great way to have impact. And I know I've shared this with past years. I've worked with folks in the White House, and almost every single one of them has constantly told me that especially those that have worked in cities and then worked in the White House, you have a bigger impact globally working in a city than you do working in the White House. And it's because we can actually impact and affect change. And that's nothing against the federal government, where there's lots of great work and work that needs to be done. But at an individual level, especially in a city like the size of Orlando, and I think the other thing to remember is, and you all have the better data on this, but in the scope of the number of cities there are in Orlando is actually a big city for the state of Florida, and so at even smaller cities you have an even bigger impact, right? And so the ability to walk in with ideas and to be able to have, we have a very supportive mayor and a supportive leadership who allows for those ideas to happen and is willing to try them, and in the private sector, because I've been there, when you have an idea, you are oftentimes competing with A, everyone else's idea, and B, different interests of the direction that the organization and the company should head. You're competing for the same budget. And oh, by the way, everyone's also trying to compete for the next job, right? It's a very different world. When you're in the public sector, and especially the city, and you have an idea, like almost everybody who's at that city, join that city to have an impact, right? And to make the city better. And so if your idea is going to help do that, they're on board, right? Like it is a way easier process to move things along. I mean, I know we all have this idea that government moves slowly, and we do. But think about, to me, the idea of being part of an organization where literally almost everyone who joined because of the mission, right? Like,
right.
They're joining because they believe in that thing, right? Which is different than joining a private sector firm because you think it's going to look good on your resume and you're going to move and you'll get a promotion and get the next job, right? So it's a very different mentality, and that's incredibly powerful to be there. We've done a lot. I mean, I talked about the Digital Service Academy to see people's eyes light up because you're asking them, right? How do you think you can make this better? And of course, the staff in permitting or in parks has these amazing ideas, right? And when I go to our parks team and say, hey, by the way, here's why you calling isn't working. Like, let's all be very clear. Why were they calling in the first place? Because they thought that was the right thing to do, right? They were trying and providing a really high level of customer service, right? Which was just not what the customer wanted. They wanted it fast, right? They were providing this high touch approach, right? But like, how cool, I mean, that's amazing that like you have somebody whose job it is to handle parks permitting that thought like, I'm going to take it upon myself to individually call everyone back to make sure that everything's going well, right? Like that's like, you want to work with people like that, right? And again, when you go to someone and say, hey, actually, I know you're trying to do great here, but by the way, what they really want is that email first, and then you can follow, oh, okay, great. Like people are on board, right? And to work in an environment like that is pretty powerful.
There was another quote from the article in GovTech that said, during the pandemic, the city has stood up services fast and cost effectively in-house with low-code tools, then tweak them with customer feedback as opposed to spending millions and years on consulting. So, you know, I always recommend students start to peruse through local government websites, you know, identify services, see where you think there may be some improvements. But COVID was a totally different animal. Could you give us any examples of some of those that they may have been referencing?
Yeah, I think, you know, COVID, really for cities all across the globe and communities all across the globe, right, was completely caught everyone off guard, and like in the private sector, right, what it meant was going remote, right, which has all sorts of implications. But when we talk about the customer, that meant we had to interact with the customers digitally. Now, because of our mayor's leadership and the project we had been working on, we had launched over 300 services digitally, right? So we had what we thought was all of our services. It turned out there were a couple missing, but we thought were all of our services that were digital, and those that even had in person, we had identified and we knew about them. So we were in a really good spot. What most cities were doing was still, I mean, I know this sounds really, trying to figure out what services they offer, right? Cities know what departments and divisions they have. They have no idea, right? There's not this catalog of services like you would have, again, in the private sector, of everything that you offer, right? And so it was going department to department, division by division to figure out how are we going to get these things and transition them online. What we were doing was, you know, turning on new services because of COVID, right? So in other words, we knew that restaurants were closed. Well, our solid waste team charges restaurants to pick up their trash. What if we let the restaurants tell us they don't need their trash picked up, right? So that was a new service that we were adding, which is essentially like pause your commercial trash pickup because your business is closed. And so instead of having to worry about how do we transition the existing services, right? Request a new trash bin, report that your trash wasn't picked up, all of those, you know, trash issues. We were able to focus on bringing new ones on that were actually helping people, right? We launched all of our initiatives to support small businesses, right? So the grants that were being given out, the housing subsidies that were being given out. And we were able to focus on that versus having to worry about how do we get all of our old, if you will, our existing services on board. And then we were able to monitor all that, right? And so I think the other gap that every city to this day still has is, you know, when you have to go into City Hall for something, if you are upset, right? I mean, we all know the Karen, like, I want to speak to the manager, but like the reality is people will ask to speak with the manager, right? And so if you're a manager of a department, you know if a service is broken oftentimes because you're being called in a lot by the customers, you know, to find out what's going on, right? Well, if it's digital, how's that happening, right? If I'm going online, I'm getting lost, and I can't find something, or, you know, it wasn't taken care of, like, you're relying on that customer to somehow track down who the appropriate person is and to tell you about it. Whereas we have, because of these feedback tools and the surveys we have, we know instantaneously, right, if something is not working because we can see it in the data. And so we actually, even though everything was remote, we were able to keep that connection with our residents to know if these services were working for them.
You guys?
Yeah, let me jump in. Matt, love the presentation. And two things that really jumped out that I wholeheartedly agree with is, number one, a data-driven approach, your data analytics. Okay, so my first question is, you know, if I'm part of a team that's participating in MuniMod, not only how important is data-driven analytics, but how can I incorporate data-driven analytics into my idea? Or do you think, as a professional, there's room for new approaches to data-driven analytics that maybe a team could be working on?
Yeah, so I think, you know, the data piece is increasingly more and more important. And I think, you know, how to approach that for any idea, you know, if you walked into, you know, our city and said, hey, I've got this idea and I think you ought to use the solution. You know, one of the first questions that will be asked, if you already haven't said it, which I'd suggest you already say it, is the impact, right? And so that impact needs to be measurable. And so I will tell you, just saying this is better for residents does not fly, right? What made our project successful was our ability to demonstrate not just that there was an increase in customer service, which, by the way, was impressive, but what was more impressive is that we were measuring trust, right? And we could go back and tie it to that. But I think being able to, you know, if you're saying we're going to make this better for residents, better for who, right? Better for whom? And you know, demonstrate that, right? Show us, even if it's a pilot, even if it's, hey, we ran a survey and, we showed people different scenarios and this is what they thought after the scenario, right? If you haven't actually done it in the real world, but having, data to back up whatever claim you're making, right? And I think I know that you all talk about, from a pitch perspective, right? And thinking about the, the infomercials on TV, but like, think about how often data is actually used even in an infomercial pitch, right? Like it's 3 times faster than, right? It's all of it has to be based off of something. And we want to know what that something is, not that it's just gonna be better or it's gonna make our lives easier. The other thing I would caution, there's a focus on cost savings, but being careful that if the cost savings is because you need less people, that's a really tough thing to sell to the people that are probably going to be the ones impacted. And that's not usually the direction that cities go in. And so think about, cost savings need to be, about increasing capacity, right? We're going to let you, instead of it will cost you half as much, we're going to let you do twice as much, right? Like that's the way to think about that exchange there. And in terms of, new approaches to data-driven, I think cities are still figuring it out, right? So it is prime to really look at how do you help cities use data. That is a challenge. And I'd say the big challenge there is, we don't have staff and leadership who, are data focused on as part of their day-to-day operation. So it's taking projects like the one that we're doing that are bringing that to light and helping them to see how that can help with their business operations. But it's not how they think. And so I think, projects that are looking at how do you embed data into operations are really a great start. Because that is lacking in most cities. They don't really have access to the data. They don't know what questions to ask. There aren't data science teams usually at cities, and so thinking about how do you fit into a world where that's really the case.
Yeah, and I guess my second point is more of a comment that I want to highlight that you mentioned in your presentation, and you're spot on. And see if you have any other additional comments above and beyond. When we talk about customer service, the importance for the user experience to make sure that it is truly user-friendly and easy to understand and navigate. I mean, I think both the slide that you put up of the grandmother's remote control was amazing. And also the junk drawer is actually a great analogy when talking about how navigating municipal websites and how important the user experience is and making sure, almost on an 880 philosophy, if you will, something that maybe an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old can both navigate as they're trying to access whatever service it is. I just wanted to highlight, and I thought that was a great point that you brought up, as the teams are developing their idea and moving forward, the importance of the user-friendly and the customer's experience.
Yeah, and I think testing that, right? So it's just, those aren't our guesses, right? I mean, it is going out, and if you have an idea, obviously as part of this, you're working on it. If your idea is going to have resident interaction, your pitch ought to have a photo of you showing it to a resident, right? And that resident, and having that analysis that says, yeah, this was easy to use, right? And so go out and validate that, right? Like you can go to a city park and talk to people and tell them what you're doing and ask them to do it and, watch. Don't tell them how to do it, and watch. And you'll get a lot of insight on that.
Good.
And showing that you've done that is going to be impressive for a city.
Good. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Matt, I was thinking back towards the COVID question, how obviously cities have had to change how they're providing services right now with everything being shut down and as things are opening up. Do you think that's going to leave a lasting impact moving forward on how cities are looking to deliver services and address issues that their citizens are facing?
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot remain. I mean, I think, in-person stuff is important to have and make available for residents who want, need, and desire that. I think that the nice thing is so many cities have transition service digitally, and obviously we're going to allow them to be digital. And so we're going to see that continue to take hold. I think the missing piece, what we did was we went out and bought tools, right? So I think it's worthwhile mentioning, my goal is not to buy a parks reservation tool. My goal is not to buy a pothole reporting tool. What we have done is we have bought a tool that is a forms tool of geo-validation that people can use, we can use for reporting. And so without a developer, I can have someone stand up a bunch of different services, right? So we have 320 services using 5 tools, right? And the idea is that a lot of cities in the past have gone out and bought that park reservation tool, and we have one too. But instead, we ought to have a reservation tool, because not only do parks do reservations, but community centers, our police department, you can reserve the community room. The street banner in College Park, you can reserve that street banner, right? So there's lots of reservations that happen all across the city. They ought to all use the same tool, and we can validate that it's user friendly. And so I think I think cities have learned is in a crisis, you need that flexibility, right? If you had to go hire a development company to build the tool to request stop service for commercial garbage, you'd be launching it now, right? Versus, a year ago, which is when it was needed. And so it's those no code, low code tools that allow us to have staff without, any engineering work to spin these things up quickly and make them happen. So I think what we'll see is more and more cities are recognizing that, because no one anticipated they needed a COVID testing tool, right? A tool to reserve your spot in line for COVID testing. Then, for whatever reason, counties couldn't anticipate that they needed a COVID vaccine registration tool, even though they had a year in theory to know that was coming. What most counties did, especially here in Florida, or a lot of counties, was use Eventbrite. And there was a lot of criticism of why are counties using Eventbrite? And I was applauding it, because you have Eventbrite, we know how it works, and oh, by the way, a lot of users out there know how it works, and it's friendly for users, because otherwise Eventbrite wouldn't have a business. So it's actually not a bad tool to use, right? It doesn't do everything we need, it's not perfect, but compare that to spending $3 million to have a consulting company come in and build you something, have it be delayed, not on time, too expensive, and then, oh, by the way, probably not actually work. It was a really good solution. And so I think what cities and counties have learned is we need these tools that we can deploy ad hoc to meet meet whatever solution we need.
Well, I got to thank you, and I know I want to keep these as succinct as I can, but I got to hear about the flying cars. So tell me a little bit about the story of when you first found out, or how it's gone, and then maybe where the city of Orlando is going.
Yeah, so one of the great things about being director of innovation and having an innovation portfolio that includes lots of different things, when I'd say it was now probably 6 years ago, but we started about 5 years ago, when after Uber and Lyft kind of surprised cities, right? We were caught off guard, and it really was a transportation transformation that we were ill prepared for cities everywhere. Mayor Dyer kind of said, okay, what's the next thing that is going to disrupt cities' transportation? And so we looked forward and realized it's what's now being called advanced air mobility, which is this idea that because batteries batteries are cheaper, electrification is cheaper, and we've got some better engineering feats that are out there, we actually can have essentially what end up being either electric airplanes that take off vertically, electric helicopters, or flying cars, depending on how you want to view what they are, but essentially a vehicle that goes up in the air and then horizontal and is cost effective, right? So we think long term it could be as cheap as the passenger mile of a vehicle. And so when that happens and that takes hold, that can have drastic impacts for regional transportation and even for local transportation commuting around a busy city. And so, Mayor Dyer challenged us, said, what is this going to mean for the city? So we've been working in really a leading city in thinking about that. And because of that, we announced late last year that Orlando will be the first city with a vertiport, we believe, that will be fully functional out by the airport in Lake Nona. And you'll be able to, get on a flying air taxi and take it to other cities across Florida. So I think, Tampa, Palm Beach, Jacksonville, et cetera. And then along the West Coast, or all up and down the East Coast as well, and eventually all the way down to the Keys. And so we think that that'll really have a huge impact on regional air travel. And so we've got a team at the city working to think about what are the next steps in that. How do we really engage in that space, and what's the city's function, right? Because we want to be prepared so that it benefits our residents. Too often, right, the private sector is the one leading it. You can actually go back from the highway system to when cars were created, to bikes, to Uber and Lyft, right? Cities always are ill prepared for those changes, and it ends up, unfortunately, screwing over, a disproportionate percentage of our residents, and it doesn't benefit everyone. And so we're really engaged to help be part of this, to help figure out how it can benefit all of our residents.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
That's gonna be great.
It's fun.
That's gonna be great.
All right, if there's nothing else, Matt, I gotta give you a huge thank you. Thank you for joining us. I know the students are gonna get a lot out of this material. And for those students that are watching, listening in, remember April 22nd is when your virtual pitches will take place. Matt, continue to do great things. You know, we'll be watching from afar and cheering you on, you and your team. So thank you very much, and look forward to hearing what your next big project is down the road.